Right, I've been instructed to call the meeting to order. Is that okay? Whatever it's called. Okay. There's some final kind of sentences that are being concluded, but we're just about there, so that's great. Look, the sooner we start, the sooner we dive into this very exciting program. Look, it's a wonderful opportunity today. Some time ago, not long after I'd landed in the ACWA CEO role, I said, look, what are we doing in the space of children in out-of-home care who have disability? We cannot be serious about the work we're doing unless we seek to contribute in that space. And so we're really grateful for the support that our member agencies have given, and for ABSEC's support, and for the support of experts. And what a wonderful opportunity then for Sydney Uni to reach out to us and say, oh, listen, by the way, we're looking to do some very substantial work in this area. And so we're here today in terms of the Workforce Forum on the intersection of disability and out-of-home care. So isn't it great when providers, right, we want to see the regulators in this space as well, and academics and other experts come to the table. It's great to also look at this program and say, and what about children with disability themselves and their leadership role for us to be guided and to make sure that we're not doing something over here when they want it done, things done with them. So there's a great opportunity today to consider some really important issues. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Those of you who've been reading the paper this week, there's still some big things we need to tackle. Those kids, for example, who are in hotel, motel accommodation. It is a sad thing for me to say, but it is true that there is a significant number of those children with disability, where the system I won't say it cannot, the system does not currently provide them with home-based care and stability that they rightly deserve. We have to tackle that issue among so many other issues that will get discussed today. So it's a great opportunity to meet today. I've been told housekeeping, you don't give me housekeeping responsibilities, but the toilets are out there somewhere, and at various points in time, coffee will appear. Okay, that's done, good. We're about to move into scene setting, because inappropriate for any occasion like this without setting the scene. We just do a couple of days' time. What have we got? Wonderful occasion, acknowledgement of International Day of People with Disability. And that's going to be, once again, a really important event, particularly given where we're at, the NDIS scheme and where are we as a nation. But in terms of where we are as a nation, it's really important for me now to step down and to hand over to Aunty and Weldon in terms of acknowledgement of country. And thank you very much, Aunty, for being prepared to open today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I need to make you aware that I am a Wiradjuri Koori Balang. And Wiradjuri is one of the mighty Aboriginal nations here in our country. Balang is woman in my language, and Koori is Aboriginal. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. I actually come from Cowra in New South Wales. And when I was born, my mother gave birth to me along with my siblings in a segregated section of Cowra District Hospital. And I grew up under the control of a mission manager and the police on that reserve. And believe you me, we were controlled by the police and by the mission manager. And for my father and my uncles to work, even my mother, and she did seasonal work, they had to get permission from the manager, and they issued them with what they called, the Aboriginal people called them dog tag. So it was an exemption to say that they could actually be classified as an honorary white person to go and work. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I'm also the grandmother of a 22-year-old beautiful granddaughter who has an intellectual disability. And in my language, in Wiradjuri language, we don't have a word for disability. We have a word for somebody that has a mental health issue, but nobody that couldn't see or couldn't walk had a disability because we were their eyes. We would carry them. They were deaf, we would hear. If they certainly didn't understand, then you would guide them and be with them. And I have cared for my granddaughter since she's been a beautiful little girl that we didn't pick up initially that she had autism. And she is an incredible, rather beautiful young woman, highly intelligent, and she completes my world. And I know that you're here, you know that work in that sector, but nobody has done a great deal for my granddaughter. Nobody. I had a worker from an agency that rang me up and told me that she's going to do this and she's going to do that. And I abruptly told her to stop. But she sounded like a car saleswoman. And I'll be rude. I said, and don't blab your bullshit to me about what you've done for my granddaughter because I know you've done nothing. So prior to actually going to work for the PSA, I've now retired because I ended up getting COVID. Loved it in March of this year, and it certainly crippled me. But I worked for the PSA, and prior to going to the Public Service Association, which is the PSA, I was a senior Aboriginal case manager in ADAC at Burwood. And, I loved the job that I had there, but of course, we have idiots that run this country. And, the government of the day in New South Wales decided they weren't going to continue supporting the sector, and it was outsourced. So, but I've got to say that when I worked in ADAC at Burwood, it was a pretty deadly team, and deadly in our terms is the best. Everybody worked together, and your clients and all of the clinicians, all of us together with the case manager certainly coordinated and gave them the level, I believe, of support that they needed, and I loved it. But I've got to say, when it comes to Aboriginal kids, I don't know about non-Aboriginal kids because I'm not involved in the non-Aboriginal community. There is nothing. There are no therapeutic services when it comes to Aboriginal kids. My granddaughter was 22 years of age. She does not have a friend. She doesn't have a friend. There's no services that are there that offer any activities or the like. So one of the things that I have decided to do, and I'll say it in front of all of you people that we know about here and actually working in the year, is that I'm hoping that we can actually, because we have a building, we certainly have the determination, and I'd love to actually develop therapeutic programs for Aboriginal kids, but more importantly, all kids that have an intellectual disability. Within that facility, we have these incredible rooms where you can do assessments. It's a special place, this play area for a play group. But upstairs, we've got a major room. I would like to bring, the young women together and the young men together and let them decide the model that they want and sort of services that they need, because it's their life and they need to be supported. And as I stand here, I'm telling you, my granddaughter, who is 22 years of age, does not have a friend. And she certainly doesn't participate. What she has is her grandmother and her siblings. So I just wanted to share that with you. So I dare say there are hundreds of Jada Lees that are out there. And she is pretty special. I mean, I'm blessed with having her. I am certainly here on behalf of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who is the cultural authority and custodian of culture, heritage, land and waterways of this particular part of Eora country, which is the land of the mighty Gadigal people. And firstly, in keeping with my cultural protocol, I bring a message of acknowledgement to the Eora Nation and the 29 clan groups and the Gadigal people as we gather on their traditional land. I acknowledge my respect of their culture and their identity. I acknowledge their spiritual ancestors, for they shall always remain within their land, our Mother Earth. And I pay my respects to all elders, past, present, and realise the many, many sacrifices that our elders have made to create a better future for all peoples in our country. For my people, Aboriginal Australia, or Wiradjuri people, because I am Wiradjuri. We have been a part of these lands that stretches far beyond 60,000 years. And within Australia, there are many different nations. Now, many nations, we are all bound by the same unifying elements of culture. Our different language groups have been here since time immemorial. In Aboriginal Australia, we are the oldest continuing culture in the world. And my people certainly have one of the world's oldest religious systems. But throughout time, our culture has adapted and been refined as we continue to do so in this present day, and certainly will continue to happen within the next 60,000 years. And this is something that we here in Australia should be very, very proud of. For Aboriginal people of Australia and my people, we certainly look with pride upon the depth and the richness of our culture, and we adhere to our spiritual commitments and to the land and to each other. And it has been through fortitude, courage and wisdom that we have survived the worst of times, I hope, and we will continue tending our sacred ground for the millennium to come. Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council certainly promotes a vision of working together as one community and to achieve as one community. And the boundaries for Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council within the Eora Nation's country spans from the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and the Georges River to the south. So it is with honour, but more importantly with the permission of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, as we have between 600 to 700 members of our local Aboriginal Land Council. It is with their permission and as their cultural consultant, but more importantly as an elder of Metro Land Council and my Wiradjuri people, I welcome you to the land of the mighty Eora Nation and Gadigal people. And I wish to thank your organisation, Sydney Uni, and all of you individuals that have come together, for certainly inviting me to conduct the Welcome to Country, but more importantly, to come together to certainly help develop and share your level of expertise to create, better pathways for people that do have, disabilities. And, I agree with you, without a home care, for people that have got disabilities, it is a shame on this country for not caring and supporting people that desperately need. I mean, we know that there is housing crisis, period. But the ones that need it most are people that certainly have intellectual disabilities that don't have the ability to be able to get what ordinary, people that have the ability to just access. And I applaud you for your efforts, and it's just wonderful that you've come together to do what you're going to no doubt discuss here today. And may the force and the power be with you all. And stick it up those idiots that want to make stupid decisions, yeah? But once again, welcome to the land of the mighty Eora Nation and Gadigal people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aunty, for giving that very heartfelt welcome and acknowledgement country today, and also highlighting the importance of the work that we do and your own experience and your own granddaughter. It's really important for us to bring that back to the young people who are who we'll be talking about today, and have young people in mind as we have this discussion. So we're so pleased to welcome you here to the University of Sydney. My name is Amy Conley-Wright. I'm the director for the Research Center for Children and Families. And we're looking forward to a very full program today, leading to some really important conversations about how we can do better in this space around the intersection of disability and out-of-home care, and how we can work with you to identify research priorities and to build relationships with yourselves and with your organizations to start doing more work in this space. We're really pleased to have this to be doing this forum in partnership with ACWA today, with the Association of Child Welfare Agencies. And Lynn is going to join to set the scene as we talk about the work that's gone into this, and also to be working with the Center for Disability Research and Policy and the Center for Disability Studies. And again, looking to form up some research in the space that is through collaboration and through direction for what's needed in the sector. So we have a very full program today. Nope. Okay. There we go. We had our beautiful acknowledgement earlier. Gadigal people of the UR Nation. We just wanted to give you an overview of the forum today. So we are starting with setting the scene, and we want to share with you some of the evidence that we have currently around the intersections of disability and out-of-home care, and also to invite Ainsworth from ACWA to share about the work that they've been doing in this space that's really led up to this collaboration. We have two guest presentations from Debbie Lee, who's here from the First Nations Disability Network, and Sue Becker from Lifestart. Then we'll have our keynote. Our keynote will be via Zoom from Dr. Ben Gauntlett, who has recently become a father, and he's on parental leave, and so I couldn't be with us in person today, but we're really delighted to welcome him via Zoom. And then we have guest presentations from Anita from Uniting, New South Wales ACT, and from Catherine Keady and Lynda Kramer from the Elver Program. And then we'll have a very short break, and then we'll go into some World Cafe discussions. So we had some great conversations that were going on earlier, and we hope to build on those and have everyone introduce themselves, and then have some conversations around some guided questions that can lead to some research development. And then we'll come back with some a wrap up and tell you about some of the research we're already planning in this space, which particularly focuses on hearing the voices of young people. Thank you. So again, the purpose of our coming together today is really to have a conversation with people who are in the space in terms of the disability and out-of-home care sectors, bring you together and understand what are some of the current practice challenges and how does that present opportunities for collaboration, practice improvement, and research. Just wanted to set the scene a little bit about with the evidence that we currently have. This was part of an evidence review that was distributed along with the calendar invitation. So we have actually very limited research on the intersections of disability and out-of-home care. And the evidence review highlighted, we found over the last 20 years about 53 studies in this space, just a small portion of those being from Australia, 13 of those from Australia. And what they highlighted is that we still have a very poor understanding of these issues, and particularly where there are opportunities to sort of build interventions and support for collaboration. So we have overrepresentation in care, but we have very limited record keeping. So we don't have systematic assessment of young people when they come into, children and young people when they come into care. And the latest AIHW report in this space identified that this disability status is only available for about 57% of children in out-of-home care. For those children who do enter care with disability, we recognize that they have significant needs and often behavioral challenges that can lead to placement in residential care at greater rates than children without disability. That among children with intellectual disability and autism are more highly represented within care than children without those disabilities, and that we see a lot of boys as well in terms of disability coming into care. And we have some key concerns that have been identified with research that again are an opportunity for building our research and our practice in this space. You know, particularly the stressors on families that can lead to children's entry into care and voluntary placement, and the need for greater family preservation, which also is sort of highlighted with the NDIS, you know, person focused versus the family focused, and the need for building up more supports for families who are experiencing crisis. Concerns about placement stability when children do enter care, and the need for support for carers to deal with the the needs of children, to avoid placement disruptions. That leaving care is a really critical transition for children, and we need to build in more opportunities for specialist supports because children often exit to inappropriate accommodation and lack access to mental health supports and positive relationships, you know, in terms of, you know, for example, friendships and other relationships that can sustain them. And then concerns that arise around health and educational outcomes in terms of young people having poor access to employment, more restrictive placements, you know, less access to education. So these are some areas that kind of bring our attention to in our conversations later as we start to talk about where are the opportunities for good practice in this space. So I want to invite up Lynn Ainsworth to talk about some of the work that's already happening in the sector that is looking at some of the issues and the ways that organizations can collaborate together. To speak to this question about how can we build the evidence in good practice.
It's just down. Yeah. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, and for all those people who are streaming in wherever you are, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging leaders. And I just want to acknowledge that Aunty Anne's introduction and welcome to us is a really poignant reminder of just how important this work is to Aboriginal children, young people, families, communities, and our society as a whole. And I think that becomes evident as we start to look at some of the information. I'm going to give you a very quick snapshot of the work that ACWA has been doing now over the past 2 years, just come up for 2 years. Many of you would be familiar with it because you contributed to it or you have participated in some way, and I'm truly grateful for the insights that you provided to us. So we started just on 2 years ago, and our first year was really one of exploration because, to Amy's point, there's so little understood about disability status of children who are in out-of-home care, and certainly our work focused on talking to our member agencies and getting a sense of what they knew and of course what they didn't know, because that's just as important. And we expanded those conversations out to a range of experts and academics in that space who had an interest. So our aim was to try and understand the incidence of children and young people with a disability in the out-of-home care system. We focused on out-of-home care because that was what was tangible and available to us, but recognised that the insights that might come out of this work have real implications for family support, family preservation work, and also restoration work. So while we were focused, we wanted to make sure that we kept sight of that bigger picture. We wanted to understand amongst those children who had been identified as having a disability, whether they were accessing appropriate supports, whether that's NDIS supports and others, the experience of providers in trying to adequately support those young people, but we also used it as an opportunity to explore with our member agencies and the other experts what opportunities there might be to make change. I think the key findings that are documented in the report that you can find on ACWA's website, and there's also a summary report of the opportunities and challenges there, were that there is actually a really high incidence of young people, and up to 30 to 40% of young people in care, it seems, may have a disability. A large proportion of those are undiagnosed or simply labelled as trauma, because that's where the expertise in the out-of-home care space is, and so that tends to be the go-to place. So the other thing that we identified was that there is probably a larger proportion of Aboriginal children and young people in the space who have a disability, and we know that they're already overrepresented in out-of-home care. So the implications for that sub-cohort are very, very significant. We identified a number of contributing factors and areas where there is a real need for additional focus and potential reform and changes to practice and policy. Just identify them quickly because I think it's important for us to bear those in mind. And you'll see that there's a lot of intersection with the things that Amy has already identified, and the work that she's been doing has been running concurrently, and I think it's perfect timing for it to converge right now. We looked at intake processes, assessment and information, recognising that we don't have appropriate assessments, let alone culturally appropriate assessments for children and young people who are Aboriginal background. That often, because of the crisis nature of that intake process, issues around disability are the last priority, so that the child protection issues tend to dominate, and that our resources and capacity in terms of systems and maintaining information about children in general are still relatively poor, let alone the lack of focus on disability. We identified that workers in our space who are experts in child protection are often have very limited understanding and knowledge of the disability sector. And interestingly, and this is with no disrespect to my colleagues in the room, some of those agencies, the bigger agencies where they're operating disability services and out-of-home care, have been operating in parallel universes, but it's really great to see and hear of some great work in bringing those together so that we can leverage that learning. Carers, foster carers in particular, kinship carers, who have the day-to-day care are not given the support that they need to understand the system into which they're going to be potentially thrown. And in particular, and Sue will talk to this, the importance of access to early intervention, where a child has some indicators of potential disability or at least developmental delay, which, you know, if we can get in there early, can be transformative for that young person. I'm not going to talk too much about NDIS systems and processes. Anyone who's in the system will understand that it is, somebody described it to me as a juggernaut with its own direction, but the recent announcement of the NDIS review, I think, is a welcome one, and we're starting to see the winds of change around that. Amy already identified the intersections of other really important systems that our children and young people find themselves thrown into, and unless we take a kind of whole of government and an integrated approach to supporting those young people, the outcomes invariably are not good. You know the systems. Aunty talked about issues around culture and the importance of culture, and that has been a major focus for us. The messages that we heard loud and clear from our partners in ABSEC and our own member agencies is that the way that both the disability system and the out-of-home care system are set up now are not culturally appropriate or culturally responsive, which is even more important. Yet we've got this disproportionate representation of Aboriginal kids in care. So what are we going to do about that? Again, there's work being done collaboratively between ACWA, DCJ and other agencies across government to try and take some steps forward. But it's imperative that we do that now if we want to prevent kids coming into care, because that's our ultimate aim. We had a great session just a week or so ago that was run by our member agency, SSI International, around cultural considerations for called children. You know, we think that there are probably about 30% of our kids in care from a called background, but you know, a called background represents 27 or more different nationalities, and each of those has their cultural nuance, and SSI is doing some really great work in that place. Transition points, you know, kids coming into care, kids moving foster care placements, kids who are starting school or having to move from a foster care environment into the residential environment, kids who are preparing to leave care or have left care, perhaps will be in extended care from next year. All of those are points where information gets lost unless we've got some sort of systematic way of collecting good, reliable and valid data around those young people. But there are also great opportunities for us to reset and say, this is a transition in this child's life. It's not just a moment in time. What do we need to really understand about that child to make sure that we're moving forward forward on the right basis with a focus in the work that I've been doing around disability. And then, of course, the voice of children and young people. One of the opportunities that we've had this year is to work in partnership with Create and hear about the experience of a group of young people who have now left care, about their experience as a young person in care with a disability, and in particular that major transition into adulthood. They are the experts in their own lives, as they should be. They have the wisdom that is going to support other young people, and they're also going to be credible from the perspective of those young people. So we need to make sure that we listen to them. So they were the big picture things, and we identified a number of opportunities. In this past year, we've been trying to action some of that, chip away at some of those things. We started by developing an action plan in collaboration with DCJ, our partners in the engagement and family support unit there, and with ABSEC. And that partnership has really been the glue through the whole year, notwithstanding the ongoing challenges of COVID and other things. But it really has been an important partnership, and we're starting to see some extension of the influence that we're able to have, particularly through the department. There are two key focus areas there. One is about opportunities to build the capacity of practitioners and carers to feel more confident in the space around disability, just get some knowledge of not necessarily disability as a whole. We don't expect them to be experts, but where to go, and the fact that there are things that perhaps they need to have at mind. And then opportunities for advocacy. And sometimes that's a slow burn, but sometimes we start to see some impacts. And those of you in the PSP space will be cognizant of the provisions in the new contract that particularly created obligations around children and young people with a disability. So we've run a number of workshops, webinars, connecting into other ACWA projects in particular, particularly around the leaving care and the carer recruitment space. We've done some intensive care around some of the children who are in alternative care arrangements. And Steve mentioned so many of those. As soon as you start to unpack, you see that they have a disability that often has gone undiagnosed, unidentified, simply labelled as bad behaviour, impact of trauma, without the opportunity to really unpack that. So I think the work that we've been doing concurrent with the University of Sydney work is now converging, and it really reinforces the importance of us setting a robust research agenda that will provide a real evidence base so we can continue the policy work, and that we can continue the development of good practice in this area, so that we can build the capacity and, most importantly, build really good futures for those young people.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Beginning to set that scene in terms of the work that we want to do together going forward. So we have two guest speakers now who will continue to speak to the space around these intersections. I'd like to first introduce Debbie Lee, who's the New South Wales Disability Advocacy Manager at First Nations Disability Network. First Nations Disability Network is a national organization for Australia's first people with disability, their families and communities, founded in 2010 by leaders of the Aboriginal disability movement. Their purpose is to promote respect for human rights, secure social justice, and empower First Peoples with disability to participate in Australian society on an equal basis with others. Debbie has been working with First Nations Disability Network for about 4 years. Prior to this, she was the NDIS First Nations Project Officer for Uniting's Local Area Coordinator Program, and has a long history in working in employment industry. Thank you so much, Debbie, for being with us today and traveling to be with us.
Thank you. Morning all. Sorry. So before I do start, I also want to acknowledge the people at the Eora Nation and the Gauntlett. but I also want to really quickly yelling to Elver, it's not how you do it, but I also really I have an extensive background. I worked with my schools and writing, then became the Advocacy project. The reason I did that because it wasn't working for our family. Again, we have to comply with the Western system that was never designed for us and it was never thought of. So I want to challenge you all and I want to start this a bit differently. So I want you all, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I want you all to form a group, okay? And I want you to go to that group. So today, I'm sorry, apologies. Better do this right now. So first of all, I want to ask who in this room actually identifies as being a black fella. Could you stand up and go over to the back of the room or the front, wherever you'd like to go? Every black fella, I want you in one car. Come on, brother. Anybody see what I'm trying to show you here? Senior level positions all run by white fellas, not by black. So that's the first thing we can do differently. Black fellas, incredibly smart. But what we don't see is any succession planning. We don't see any senior roles. We don't see any opportunity. But what we still see is a system that's designed like mission management. You're still telling us what to do today. If I can say that, and that's the way. This is our senior leader as well. This is the senior leader. Some people over here. Come on now, I know you don't want that exercise. Wow. Okay. Who here has a family member with a disability? Come over to a different space. If you're in that space, come over here if you have a family member with a disability. Wow. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? So what this tells me is each and every one of you senior leaders should get it. You should understand because you have family who go through the same struggle that they're about to talk about. The last one, who here is really committed to standing for change? Enough excuses, enough of telling us you don't know what to do. Who is really ready to be a leader and an inspiration? Jump over there. Now, I know you're all going to go over there because nobody wants to be shamed up, right? That's right. Now, who here thinks we can do this better? Come towards me. I always wanted a heap of mob to rush me. No. Now, please, take a seat. I've just shown you fellas something. What's wrong with this system was the first question that I asked. Okay? So, I'd like to just now jump into disability, what that looks like for out-of-home care. Oh, might just take it. So I do a lot of work with ABSEC. I cut across every single sector. I'm the New South Wales Disability Advocacy Manager, so we report on systemic issues. We also do individual advocacy. I also hold the lead position in the Coalition of Aboriginal People on Closing the Gap. So disability, let me tell you, really has no voice, really, even in our Closing the Gap. Yes, it has a commitment. but it doesn't really say with any of those. So that's our first issue. Is that our government again today still sees disability being the poor cousin of health. Let me tell you, we ain't the poor cousin of health. We're health's auntie. Okay? So this is the reason I say this is because each and every senior executive that I deal with, or that we advocate for, or that we fight for, there seems to be a sticking point in that you fellas all believe what the government has told us. Health sits over here, disability sits over here. And Australia made those changes. We did. We thought we were doing the right thing because we thought it would give disability a space. But what it actually did was it segregated mobs with disability. So Uncle Leslie Bostock and Aunty gave them about 21 years ago. Right, that wasn't good enough for our families. That wasn't good enough. Right, we were being left behind. This is Aunty Ainsworth. We don't have a word for disability. Even my own son will not tell his child he has a disability. I have multiple disabilities, right? I can speak all day underwater. I've got ADHD. I'm on the spectrum. I've got anxiety. I've got post-traumatic stress. You know, the list is quite endless, but that's what makes me unique at my job. Because you give me a problem, I'm going to hone in and I'm going to hunt. Right? And I will bring you that. Now, if we're going to change it, it's not just about changing what's in the legislation. It's about actually changing your application to the way that you're delivering, to the way that you drive your workers, to the way that you support your workers, right? In the APS employment strategy, it says, it's good enough for this government to only increase Aboriginal roles by 57 to 2025. So does that don't tell you, a black fella, we're not valued? So the first thing I'd say to you, if you really want to make that change, start employing black fellas. Stop sending white fellas out into the field to do our work, because it won't work. We were walking into families, and let me give you an example. This is just one family dealing with these people. Aunt lives out in Bogangate, 2 kids with disability, their own biological family, has them for 7 years, makes significant improvement. DCJ walks in at midnight. Let's give you another 3 kids, Aunt. They all got disabilities too. And they got 5 in a 3-bedroom house, 1 hour away from Condobolin or Peak Hill. Right? Doesn't matter where you want to go. They dumped the 3 kids. Off they go, they're happy. But have those kids had any medical in the last 2 years? No. Have they had any dental? No. Have they been? Little Mook's there, who's 6 years old, says to me after she returned to school and being with me, I don't know. Honey, them boys, you think that makes sense? The real kids. If they were your kids, would it matter? So why doesn't it? As the second largest reform in Australia, which says it is needed. It is not. The NDIS can be such a beautiful thing if it works. That is true for these kids. One young girl, 18 years old, is now facing the jail sentence thanks to her guardian. We told her at the age of 17, you're a big girl now, bub. You right, off you go. We'll even get you a birthday cake to celebrate. She didn't know she was entitled to be supported by guardianship after she was old. But she also didn't know that being homeless for 3 years prior to that whilst under guardianship, it's not. I'm sorry, that is what we are seeing. Right across the board, right across the state, nationally. In particular, here in New South Wales, these issues are so significant, it's not funny. We have to fight to prove we have a disability. All right, every day we are fighting one system or another, whether it's education or not. But yet what we know is that each and every one of your senior level staff goes home and watches the news at night, yeah? So you all would be aware that there is issues getting medical reports, getting specialist reports, getting evidence. Hell, there's even an issue trying to fill up your car if you live out west for $2.40 a litre. You know, a packet of chops right now out in Walgett. You don't want to have a guess what 2 chops are worth out in Walgett? $58. Price gouging at its finest, yeah? That was 76 over that, but does anything get done about it? No, the government knows, right? So these are some of the real problems that our communities are facing. Right now, as we speak, suicide rates are spiking. Domestic violence is spiking. Homelessness is spiking. Court presentations are spiking. So what's going to happen, what we talk about here today, is actually going to seem insignificant to what we're going to see in 6 months or 12 months' time. Given the floods, given the natural disasters, given the lack of food, given the poverty, all of those things. What we will be about to see and what we should look to prepare for is what is that future going to look like for us. So if mum and dad have lost their home, they can't feed the kids, they can't get the kids to school, they know how to do it. I would applaud you all, not just to think about the present time or your present state or your operation. Start employing Aboriginal people. Stop telling us it's too hard. You know, every day, because I'm a pale skin, and yet I'm black skin. But every day when I walk into a room, people see me. I get a different response. I'm also one of those children. And found out 2 months ago that who I thought raised me as parents, that's not my parents, it's mine. There's lots of things our families go through for good reason. And that is because the government always designed the system that they thought needed to be in place. However, at 400 laws, so it just goes to stand until the test of time. You know, if we do something wrong with our kids, right, if they've got disability, like I said, we don't even tell them they've got disability. Now, come on now, hurry up. That's it. Right? Not because we know that kid is going to drop behind, you know, it's going to be a bit slower than the kids. That's okay. And the reason, in my opinion, that we don't tell our kids they're different is because we don't want to set them up to fail from the start. It's your government system that tells us we're different. It's your government system that has always told people with disability they can't do it. Why can't they do it? We all recognise when Kurt Burnley wins an award, yeah? We all recognise that. So why do we not walk away from here today and think differently about disability? So when you get someone with a disability, let me tell you, my little HR lady, she's got a disability, non-mobile, highly contorted, you know, so many challenges, many physical challenges. Best damn pay lady I've ever met in my life. And I've worked for liquidation insolvency accountants at the age of 16. And believe me, if I send that woman anything, boom, boom, boom. But if I had have assumed because of you, Bill, it would be a very different story. So I just want to encourage you to take away one thing from me, because I could go on all day and give you hard facts of the work ahead of you fellas that needs to be done. But the one thing I want you to take away is that this little exercise, the imbalance of power. Let go of some of your control. Put a black dollar in the front of your seat and watch your programs actually flourish. Watch them respond to your contract. Watch your tender rates go up. So that's the first thing. The last thing, if we don't have this knowledge and we talk about data, well, I say it's not true. The government's always had this data and they've always known about disability. For $170 million of black money that we fund your government programs, don't tell me you don't have data. If any of our organisations applied for a contract, even a $10 contract, hell, we've got even data yet. So why does this government not have data? They do, but they only have 150 indicators that dictate what comes out of that data. So they need to go back and look at that again. Because by way of Australian definition, almost every Aboriginal child out there today is seen as having a disability. So please, not about the piece of paper that sits before you, it's about the person. Right, so if Mooks comes in and they're in front of you, something there, something different with that kid, maybe there is. But use that as the opportunity to help that child grow. Right, because our children, they are future. Your future child, your future brother. So unless we help these babies grow up strong, and these are babies who might have gone through 15 different homes, 15 different white families. So if we want to change this, each and every one of you told me today, you're in a position to change it. Because you're standing. I would encourage you to be that industry leader. I would encourage you to be fearless, not just today while you're in this room, but when I ring your organisation, I say, oh, how many Aboriginal workers there do you have? Do you have an Aboriginal unit I can speak to? I want to hear some more yeses. I don't want to hear, oh, sorry about that. We don't know how to speak to your people. Because that's what I hear. I even hear that out of staff at the commissioner's offices, and I won't say which one, that's not appropriate. So come on, yeah. That's what we hear. Thank you. Not a solution, because we never knew this a solution. What we need. Time, accepted, or you will have something unique that they bring to the table, just like you, brother, just like you. We all have different strengths, and we need to encourage that. We need to help them.
Much, Debbie. Yes, so much to add to our conversation. Going to move to Sue Becker. Sue has been a social worker in the disability and community services sector for 4 decades and the CEO of Lifestart, which supports children and young people with disability or developmental delays, their families and carers since 2010. In addition to managing disability organizations, Sue has worked in local government as an academic and a consultant. She has held leadership roles on a number of NGO boards and state and disability advisory committees, and she was a founding member of the National Disability Services National Workforce Committee and is current chair of the New South Wales NDS Children and Young People and Families Committee and chair of the NDS New South Wales Workforce Committee. And she is passionate about an inclusive community which recognizes diversity and the uniqueness of each individual, where all people can have the right supports to lead an ordinary life alongside their peers. Thank you very much, Sue.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I am really croaky, so you'll please forgive me. So, first of all, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the custodians of country, the Cadigal peoples of the Eora Nation upon whose land we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and future. I recognise the continuing connections of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, peoples to land, waters and community. I also acknowledge a small number of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues here today. I don't think I can even talk now and match what you've said, Deb. It's just, I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, why didn't someone else sort of, like you've after Deb? Yep, it was just brilliant and thank you. And I think you've told such a powerful, powerful story. Now, I need to start by saying that Lifestart does not offer out-of-home care, home-based care. We're a disability organisation. We provide services for children, young people, their families and carers across Greater Sydney. We also provide a number of services up the Central Coast, down the Illawarra Shoalhaven, and we provide a lot of online services across Australia. And we understand clearly that raising a child in home-based care or out-of-home care with disability to boot raises a number of significant challenges, but it also should be raising a number of opportunities for change in our community so that we can have a more inclusive community. There's a but, we talk about that, and I've said that we don't provide out-of-home care services, but there's a number of fundamental principles, and I think you've touched on some of them already, Deb, and I know that you touched on them and Amy before her, which can be applied to supporting a child or young person to achieve their potential as part of our community, Australian community. We operate in an environment of standards and compliance, which is essential for supporting some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged children and young people in our community, along with their families and their carers. But hearing today what you people have already said, we start to wonder about those areas of compliance and how can we do things better. And I sat there, and I don't want to use the word shame, but I was astounded at how few people in this room gathered today actually identify with First Nations people. Because when we look at the stats of the numbers of children and young people who are in out-of-home care, the high level of numbers of kids who are First Nations people in out-of-home care, why are there so few people in this space managing those services, implementing those services, and having a voice in those services beyond contributing to workshops or whatever, and including where's the decision-making processes that are happening there. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm on a high horse, but I'm just acknowledging the need for change. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to talk about our disability workforce, the things we do, and hopefully acknowledge really clearly that there's, as I've said previously, there's lots of fundamental principles, whether we're providing a disability service, whether we're running education services, the health sector, community services, out-of-home care. There's lots of basic things that we should all be committed to. And the first thing is putting the person, the young child or the young person with a disability at the centre of what we do. They, along with their families and their carers, are the experts in their own lives. We walk alongside them, we assist them, we might provide some supports or find out where they can get more supports, but we should not be the decision makers in how they live their lives. And we know it is really a really tricky space when we talk about all the compliance that sits around out-of-home care. Get that, and I'm not denigrating in any way the need to ensure that the right services at the right time are provided to the people who we support and by the right people providing those supports. So we have a strong commitment to safeguarding child protection. We recognise that that's essential, but how do we marry that up with building and maintaining a valued, competent, skilled and committed workforce in one of the most demanding areas of social care? We do have a number of Aboriginal workers in our organisation. We could do better. We have a commitment strategic plan to recruit more Aboriginal workers. We advertise to try and attract Aboriginal workers, but we are also committed to bringing in targeted appointments, because having targeted appointments is the only way we are going in targeted positions, is the only way we're going to actually achieve some real change. And recognising as well that not every person whom we recruit will necessarily go down to standard recruitment, the attraction and recruitment, the actual onboarding and everything else that goes in this space. We have to do some things differently. And while we talk about being person-centred for the people that we support, we also need to be person-centred in the people that we employ and make sure that we cater for individual differences. So I'm going to talk today about Lifestart's approach to building and sustaining the most engaged, skilled and trained workforce that we can. And I actually think Lifestart is a really good organisation. I'm actually finishing up in 2 weeks' time. So I can reflect on what's gone for the last 13 years and all the things that we still need to do, the things that we need to do better, and what can we learn from what we've done in the past. And it is really essential, I think, for everyone, all those people that were lined up over on that side of the room, that were managers and decision makers, what can we take away and what can we do better? Where can we influence change? And sometimes it's really important if it's only a little bit of change or a big piece of change. Making that contribution is just essential. It's just so essential. Now I'm sticking to my notes today. Usually I sort of lean conversations, but I'm really conscious of making sure that I get everything in I want to say. So please forgive me. So we support children and young people up to the age of 24 years with developmental delays or disabilities, their families and carers. And in referring to families and carers, I'm including parents, siblings, kinship groups, foster carers. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge the important part that those people play in the lives of their children. And when I talk about, when I'm using the term disabilities, I'm also covering disabilities and developmental delay. We're a registered NDIS provider, an early childhood partner in the community with the NDIA. And we were actually one of the 4 providers in the original Nepean Blue Mountains trial sites back in 2015-16. So we've had a lot to say about the co-design of the early childhood approach. And I must say, Deb, and Anita and other people who have been involved in LAC programs and early childhood programs, it would be really great if the federal government, under part of the NDIS review, could separate out the early childhood space in terms of the partner community and the local area coordination space. The two are essentially intrinsically different. If we could get that early childhood space right, how good would it be for children as they transition to other services? And I'm not going to talk about the NDIS today. I think the NDIS, I'd already decided that, it was good to hear you say that too. And nor am I going to talk about the Quality and Safeguards Commission. They are both receiving a lot of publicity. I've been watching the media this week. But so I just want to come back to our workforce, what we do and how can we do things better. I'd like to think we have been innovative in developing programs for young people that foster their voice, their independence and connection in a culturally appropriate and responsive way. We can't just keep providing services that we think we're the experts in the room without taking into account the voice of the people that really matter. So we have really high expectations of what children and young people can achieve. We are very strongly committed to a social model of disability and viewing inclusion as a way of life. And has been very interesting to listen to talking about the disconnect between, for example, health and disability. We could say the same thing about disability and education. So and that's just got to change going forward. And I did say I wasn't going to talk about the NDIS, but I am going to say briefly something about the NDIS review. I think with the appointment of Bruce Bonner-Hady and Lisa Paul, and really being pretty, I'm not going to use the words, being very critically attuned to what needs to change. I'm hoping that in a year's time, we will see some positive changes in the NDIS space. So we're committed to partnership with children, young people, families and carers, like-minded organisations and our communities to contribute to a world where all children and young people can belong and they can thrive. And I think we've already heard today about the significant number of children and young people in out-of-home care who probably aren't thriving and they're certainly not belonging. So what can we do to change that? When you look at the stats of the number of children in out-of-home care that were released this week, and you hear about the number of First Nations children and young people in that space, we actually all should be really ashamed of that figure. It is appalling. How can we be in 2022 and have that actually in place? I trained as a social worker a long, long time ago, actually back in the 70s. And I thought looking forward, I would never have thought that our life now in 2022, that there'd be so many stories still being told and there's been no change in all that time. So what are we doing wrong? And then we can't lay all the blame at government because a whole lot of this is around how our community responds to the need for change too. So that's really critical. So Lifestart's core values are inclusion, collaboration, diversity, and integrity. Our work reflects a person-centered approach, and we recognise the importance of family-centered practice. I've already talked about recognising that families, children, young people, they're the experts in their lives. How much time? Yeah. So in the disability space, in the disability workforce, with the introduction of the NDIS, things changed and there was a huge amount of growth very quickly. And we're also challenged at the same time. I might need 2 minutes. At the same time, we have an international labour shortage. We have a shortage of staff that can work efficiently, effectively, and meaningfully in the disability space, in the out-of-home care space. So what do we do to change that? And recruitment and retention are the critical things, because one would hope that in recruiting people, in retaining people, what are the soft skills we're looking at? What are the things that people can do differently? We can teach some skills, but there's some things that people have got to bring into a job. They've got to have that right way of actually offering the supports that they're being asked to provide. We know there's a shortage. It started off, the conversation used to be about shortage of allied health professionals. Now we talk about the shortage of the whole disability workforce. And the same is for the community care workforce. And that is really, really critical. One of the most important things, and people have touched on it already, is the need for good behavioural supports, positive behavioural supports. And we know that often short-term intervention is going to make a huge difference in the transition points of a child's life and a young person's life. So how do we do that better? We need to identify and invest in ways that can reduce all the red tape and the reporting on compliance, etc., that staff on the front line do. We have a massive burnout of staff. What are the ways we can use technology to make that part of the work easier so they can focus on the work that they've actually been hired to do, which is to provide supports and services. We need to promote the voice and participation of children and young people that we support. We need to embed the rights of children and young people in everything that we do. We need to empower families, carers, educators, and other important people in the life of a child or young person to feel confident in helping them to thrive and belong. We need to recognise diversity at Lifestart. Jenny, Jenny's my colleague sitting down the back. Currently, we're supporting about 9% of our client group are identified with First Nations, and about 28% with core communities. So what is it now? Maybe in the 30s? Yep. So that's a significant number where we can achieve changes. And if we can do it, how do we do all that better and how do we grow that? And We have to collaborate. We have to recognise that it is important to achieve quality outcomes. We need to focus on the outcomes we're trying to achieve for children and young people, not the inputs and the outputs. They're important, and it's how the engine runs. But what do you get at the end? Almost finished? Yep. So we have a number of we released our strategic plan. You can go online and look up Lifestart strategic plan. I'm not going to say everything's in it, but I think it's a really good plan. Jenny thinks it's a really good plan too. Yep. And it's really important to marry up the staff we employ, we train, we hope we keep, we train them well, we recognise the importance of learning and development in that work. And how do we marry up that with our service provision and the people that we're supporting? How do you get those two things right? And perhaps we might be able to keep people longer, because one of the most important things in any work with a child or a young person is the stability of the people working with them. Having a new carer every day or every week, whether it's a child or young person or older person with a disability, that is not a very good life. It's just actually really unsettling, and it's just unfair. And then we criticise people for not achieving the goals that have been set, sometimes by someone else other than them. So how do you do that? So we've got to look at the talent. We've got to pay a lot of attention to learning and development. We cannot keep talking, and in our conversations with both state and federal governments, learning and development is just an add-on. You know, we can't really talk about that. We've got to talk about your salaries, and that's it. There's lots of other things that make an effective workforce. Learning and development is part of that. So it just needs to be important. You've talked about leadership. I'm not going to talk about leadership anymore because you've said enough, and I think you've got a much more powerful story than I have. So many people in the room, we all know what has been done, but I think we all know what could be done, and how do we make those changes? How do we become leaders with an increased workforce, recognising the uniqueness of the role that Aboriginal work, I'm just going to say First Nations, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander workers can lead by example. What do we change? If we know it's not working, and there's 22,000 children out of home care at the moment, we're obviously doing something wrong. So how do we tip that upside down and do something right? So we need to invest in children and young people, including those living with disability or in out-of-home care. So I'm just passing, that sounded like a rant, didn't it? Sorry. But it's really important that we make those changes, and how can we do things differently? So hopefully your team will come up with some wonderful ways of doing things differently, and the work done by ACWA as well. So I just want to acknowledge that. And thanks everybody for listening to me.
Thank you both. I'll make a few observations at the end, but not now. Although my mind did go to what I've been taught by work with Aboriginal communities now over 30 years, where people, community leaders said, we're the most consulted people in the country. We actually want to see some action, and it's very well done to kind of illustrate that point. So thank you. So look, it's my pleasure now to introduce Ben Gauntlett, who commenced his 5-year term as Disability Discrimination Commission, the Australian Human Rights Commission, in 2019. And prior to this, Ben was a barrister in Western Australia and Victoria, and has worked as an associate at the High Court, as counsel assisting the Solicitor General of the Commonwealth, a solicitor for a large commercial law firm, and taught law in Australia and the United Kingdom. And Ben studied at the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and as Disability Discrimination Commissioner. Ben advocates to remove barriers to people with disability participating in society and ensure the human rights of people with disability are respected. So it's my great pleasure in handing over to Ben at this point in time. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's been great and illuminating to hear the previous speakers. I'm coming to you today remotely because perhaps unexpectedly I just became a parent last 21st of November, which has presented some differences in life, but also means that when you read reports about children, you do seemingly have a far stronger emotional attachment to what it is occurring to children in Australia, and in particular, children with disability being moved into out-of-home care. The out-of-home care issue and moving children with disability into out-of-home care is one that exists in Australia and across the world. It's one that has been spoken about for long time periods, but it's not one that we have been able to resolve. And it's one where we need to very much understand the need to engage at multiple levels over a sustained period to get change. Those multiple levels include, but are not limited to, law reform and funding for appropriate organisations, organisational reform in terms of how organisations see and employ people with disability and people from other diverse backgrounds and culturally and linguistically diverse individuals and First Nations people, and also that each and every one of us takes on board the importance of this issue. I prepared a brief slide deck, which I'm going to, in the finest traditions of Zoom, try and share with you today. Can you all see that slide deck? I'll take that as a yes.
It's loading up. We see your, yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Is it loaded now?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. So in terms of what I'm going to present to you today is, I wanted to talk initially about the lives of people with disability in Australia, and to be clear about the multiple levels of disadvantage that's faced, but also to frame the discussion in terms of perhaps our evolution as to the understanding of the different models of disability. I'm then going to talk about the human rights of people with disability in Australia and some of the key human rights instruments, but also to acknowledge the specific human rights of children and young people and the importance of family that's stressed. And finally, I'm then going to get onto the issue of what we know about children with disability in Australia from the data that is collected and some of the issues that I see with out-of-home care. There are 4.4 million Australians living with disability. That definition, as has been pointed out in the paper that has been circulated before today's event, though, takes a specific definition of functional domains. There are also 47.3% of Australians which live with some form of chronic health issue. So disability is a widespread issue, and chronic health conditions would almost all be picked up by the Disability Discrimination Act. But over 80% of disability is acquired during the totality of someone's life. And although a lot of people will think of disability as white Anglo-Saxon men in wheelchairs, nothing could be further from the truth. Over 80% of disability is actually invisible in nature. And what we do know is that if you have a disability, it radically affects how you intersect with other service systems, but also other life domains. And one of the ones that jumps out of me the most is education. That is that only 33% of people with disability have completed Year 12. And when we consider the importance that is placed on employment in Australia and the fact that in the knowledge economy, over 5 out of 6 jobs will require some form of tertiary qualification, there are profound issues relating to ensure that people get a start in life which enables them to build a better future. 7.6% of children live with some form of disability. The vast preponderance of those disabilities are intellectual and cognitive and also neurodiversity. There's also quite a lot of sensory disability amongst those children. But the incidence of disability is not equal. And I should acknowledge in this respect that the data collection is probably imperfect. But we do know that First Nations children with disability and culturally and linguistically diverse people with children often have a higher incidence of disability than is actually reported. But what is reported is that, and this was taken the Disability Royal Commission in its public hearing 16 on First Nations people in out-of-home care is that 22% of First Nations children have some form of disability. Now, there are approximately 500,000 National Disability Insurance Scheme participants. I heard before that there is a discussion about the review of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. There have been many reviews. The Royal Commission will also delve into how the National Disability Insurance Scheme works. But today I wanted to also put the National Disability Insurance Scheme in context. And the National Disability Insurance Scheme exists as a wider policy framework called Australia's Disability Strategy. And the way how I often think about it, or try to, is if the National Disability Insurance Scheme is the house, Australia's Disability Strategy is the foundations to the house. And if you don't get the foundations right, you constantly have to fix the house. And that's what's happening in Australia at the moment. We don't have the foundations right to enable the house to be built where we're constantly not patching the walls. So human rights is obviously a core aspect of what I do, and I do note my beloved former colleague Megan Mitchell in the audience, who I had the extreme pleasure of going to Geneva with to present in relation to the Convention on the Rights of, for her children, and for me, people with disability. But in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, although it's an intersectional treaty with a lot of general principles that exist throughout it, and an understanding of the importance of data and implementation being the most modern human rights treaty that has been created. But two articles I think are of critical importance in terms of the discussion of children out of home care. One of those is Article 7, and the need for children with disabilities to be represented. Children and Young People with Disabilities Australia is a fabulous organisation which does represent children with disabilities. But the only thing I always think when dealing with them is just how many children are not appropriately represented or heard. And the other article that's important is the respect for home and families, which exists in Article 23, which tries to make sure that the placing of people in out-of-home care is not on the basis of their disability, that there's clear review frameworks, and it is an absolute last resort that occurs, noting the damage and danger that can occur. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, though, did not seek to create a whole bunch of new rights. It just picked up rights which existed in a plethora of other human rights treaties and brought them into a more consolidated version, understanding the need for what is a concept called inclusive equality. So when we think of disability, people talk about the medical model of disability, where people are defined by their medical background and need to be cured. The charity model of disability, which is that people are objects of inspiration. Again, both those models have been disproven. And in the 1980s, the social model of disability became very much something that people were aware of. And that is that it's the external environment which creates disability for an individual. But the social model of disability actually has some limitations. And the new model of disability, which I'm trying to get people to understand, is the human rights model of disability, which understands that diversity is part of the human condition, and that what we need to have is an inclusive equality framework where we accommodate difference, but understand the need for participation and representation of people with disability in all aspects of life. Why that's so important is that when we consider the issues such as the optional protocol for the Convention Against Torture, which Australia was just considered under, how many times are young people with disability deprived of their liberty in different settings in Australia at present? We need to have discussions about all aspects of a person with disability's life, and to pick up all human rights in a non-siloed manner to ensure that people with disability are included in the discussion. But I said before I was going to take you to Australia's disability strategy to hopefully frame the debate. I should add I have a little bit of a vested interest in this, in that I chair the Disability Advisory Council to the Australia's Disability Strategy, which has a number of state representatives on it and who are people with disability. It's based on the previous National Disability Strategy, which In 2019, when Australia was reviewed under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability, it was found that the implementation had been patchy. Now, that patchy implementation has flowed on to causing challenges with the National Disability Insurance Scheme. But what was picked up in this strategy, which was a good thing, was the importance of community attitudes as a clear issue for the inclusion of people with disability. But another aspect of what was picked up was the importance of implementation. And the reason why I raised the issue of implementation is that any researching the issue of out-of-home care, I think probably has to be really mindful of what roles and responsibilities are attributed to state or Commonwealth government, but also that there are targeted action plans which seek to try and get people with disability to live a better life. And I do note there is an early childhood targeted action plan where Victoria and the Northern Territory have given commitments in relation to out-of-home care. One of the ways that this strategy tries to overcome what was previously articulated in relation to the previous strategy was the use of targeted and associated action plans. And a way that reform could occur in this area is for the Academy, people with disability, interested parties to push for that targeted action plan or associated action plan to have really quite substantive outcome measures which drive change. The targeted action plan and the data collection mechanism were based largely on there's some European Union work where the Sustainable Development Goals and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities were looked at, and they came up with data indicators that could be used by different countries in relation to outcomes. They're not perfect, but they're a start. And what there is a periodic review mechanism for Australia's disability strategy, which I encourage you all to be really active of. It's not just the NDIS, which is sort of something that needs to be considered. So if we look at children with disability in Australia, one of the things that jumped out at me last night when I was preparing for this presentation was I went to the concluding observations of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability in 2019, and I found that the observations were actually heavily weighted to the position of people with disability as parents. And I really wondered to myself why that was. And then I realised it is very, very difficult for a child to advocate on their own behalf as to what their needs are. And so there is an incredibly important issue of appropriate advocacy and representation for children. I then went and looked at some of the data that exists in the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. And one of the things that is, I think, perhaps most challenging in this area is that disability itself is very diagnosis specific in terms of how a person is characterised. But where a person has other diversity characteristics such as gender or certain types of cultural background, that does have an effect on the likelihood of diagnosis taking place. And finally, there was the involvement of parents that was considered, and some of the involvement of parents was, in a sense, a little bit troubling. And it was troubling because disability was directly correlated with the likelihood of abuse taking place. And in Australia, we can often overlook abuse of people with disability. The Anne-Marie Smith case, where an individual died in their own home covered with egregious pressure sores where she'd been treated basically from malnourishment, did not get anywhere near the publicity of certain other issues that occur in relation to human rights concerns that exist in Australia. And we need to be really conscious that when we discuss disability, we don't other the situation and value each and every life as being important. So when I look at out-of-home care, and it's funny when you pick up a paper to prepare, and I looked at Mr. David Tune, who had previously written a review of the NDIS. I hadn't realised he'd also written a review of the out-of-home care system in New South Wales. I think it's really important that we are quite clear that out-of-home care can be a gateway to violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability for a lifetime. that we need to be super vigilant to get a fantastic data set and oversight mechanism, because we are dealing with some of the most vulnerable situations in Australia, that we cannot have a system which is wholly reliant on some form of medical diagnosis, because then it creates a socioeconomic favoritism, which is troubling, particularly in regional and remote areas or areas where there are a lack of services. We need to be conscious of the Commonwealth state divide in this discussion and workforce shortages that has taken place. And I think we need to very much advocate that education and the criminal justice system are affected by the out-of-home care system, so that we really understand, or get government to understand, the importance of creating a system that's fit for purpose now and for generations. So I think if I was to sort of list the key issues that I sort of see going forward, and some of the previous speakers have picked these up, it is of the utmost importance that when we communicate, we understand that it has to be accessible to the person who is receiving the information. That's not just about sensory disability, it's that we communicate in a manner that people can understand, that we model what is best practice, we collect data, we have consistent definitions and have an early intervention mentality. But we also need to be really vigilant that this is not just a National Disability Insurance Scheme issue. It's a whole of society issue, with all levels of government needing to be engaged. It's an issue that the Disability Royal Commission has considered in relation to First Nations people, but hopefully it's something that will report upon more generally in relation to all individuals with disability. And finally, there was work done under the National Disability Data Asset, which for my many sins, I also chair the Disability Reference Group in relation to children in New South Wales. We need to advocate for policies like the National Disability Data Asset to be brought on at scale quickly, because they can build a framework to create a better policy solutions for people with disability now and in the future. So I might leave it there, and thank you very much for listening to me start. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I hope to catch up with you all soon.
Thanks very much, Ben. Thank you. It needs action. It needs sophisticated action. And that action needs to take place in the context of fundamental understanding and absolute commitment to human rights. Absolutely critical. This isn't going to happen on a wish. As I'm hearing various things, I'm getting more nervous. Why? Because it ain't easy. Okay, but we have to get serious about this. And one of the things we'll have to grapple with is how, from a systems point of view, do we make things work? Not so that we want to run a wonderful system to make us feel good, but because ultimately the impact on people. But we can't be fed income in this space unless we take a sophisticated system approach. Now, I could give long introductions to the next presenters, but they don't want that because they want to get up here and tell us really important things. So I'm going to introduce in one go the next two speakers, Anita, Head of Operations for Uniting New South Wales ACT, who will tell us all we need to know, right, about what she wants to tell us. And then we'll move on to Keady and Lynda Kramer, Manager and Clinical Lead of the Elver Program. So no need for separate introductions. Let's hear what our next speakers have got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That's possibly the weirdest bio I've ever had read out, so that's good. Good start. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Anita. Like to acknowledge the beautiful Gadigal land that we're meeting on today. Acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, Aboriginal colleagues in the room, and also, I guess, acknowledge importantly the work, so much work we all still have to do in ensuring that Aboriginal kids with and without disabilities stop entering care at the rate that they are, and that if they are in care, that we get them back to kin as quickly as we possibly can. So absolutely all committed to that work, but still lots to go. So I'm going to try and be quick. So I'm sensing a bit of anxiety, so I'll try and be quick. And I'll start just by acknowledging this weird image up here. I do love a Google image. Maybe others in the room do too. And in thinking about the presentation, I Googled 2 words, complexity and intersection, and probably not strangely enough, I came up, Google gave me this image. And I thought, that's weird, that's not going to work. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized it actually, if my job today is to set the context for the out-of-home care space, it probably reflects pretty well what I think goes on and what it looks like. It's multi-layered, it's often confusing, and it's absolutely always complicated. So I thought it kind of, it worked as setting the context. I'm going to outline, do you want me to drive myself or you? Yep, okay. My job is to outline some of the broader sector contexts, and I do that from a uniting perspective. So absolutely acknowledge the amount of, I can see the wisdom in this room. So, and I think we could talk about the out-of-home care context on its own, probably for the whole week. So I'll just push in at the edges and know that there's other thoughts, many other thoughts, and much more wisdom in the room. And while I do set the scene with some challenges, I think that the sector faces, with or without the intersection into the NDIS and disability, I do want to point out that every day, as you probably do, I see caseworkers absolutely committed, absolutely dedicated, acknowledging the challenges and some of the pressures of their role, and trying to find solutions and try to do the best that they can for kids and young children and young people. So just wanted to kind of offset some of the negativity, perhaps. So what does our sector look like broadly? It's highly regulated. It's quality and compliance driven. We know that. It's highly scrutinised, and we know that because we've been reading the Herald this week. So we get it wrong. It's very public. Can be crisis driven and reactive, and that's just the nature of the work. We did a recruitment video at Uniting, and we asked staff to talk about a day in the life, you know, of somebody in out-of-home care and PSP. And we had a coordinator say, well, every day I come into work and my calendar says I'm going to do this, and not one single day do I actually do what my calendar says I'm supposed to be doing. So we're often reactive and we're often crisis driven. Our workforce is time poor, and I'll show an image next that sort of cements that. And look, I think it can really impact on opportunities for learning and for professional development. And when you're talking about the NDIS, you're talking about another language, and caseworkers really needing to learn another language and another set of practice frameworks. So when you're time poor and crisis driven, and you know, you're compliance driven, there's a whole series of things coming in pretty hard. Not sure about everybody else, but attracting and retaining staff is a growing issue for all of our social and community services sector. We acknowledge burnout's a challenge, and we acknowledge that not everybody wants to work in out-of-home care. We're 4 years into the cultural shift to permanency and restoration. We're seeing differences in terms of our work positively with birth families, but added complexity where we have kids with disabilities in families, and we're liaising and negotiating with carers, with birth families, with children, and all of the folks that sit around those kids when they have you know, complex needs. And certainly New South Wales, it's no secret, everybody in the room knows it. So New South Wales and nationally, we have a crisis in terms of attracting and retaining carers into our sector. And we're looking forward to ACWA and DCJ and the sector working more on that over the coming years. So we sit in a complex ecosystem. So if we're thinking about a child with a disability, a young person with a disability on our case, on our caseload, we've got every day, sorry, it's sort of fallen outside the circles there. You know, when we were thinking about the sorts of things that go on in the day of the life of a caseworker. You know, we're expected to be experts in cultural plans, behaviour support plans, in family finding more and more, and engaging with families, in assessing risk, in getting kids back home, and all the work that restoration takes. In listening to children, somewhere in there, we try and listen to kids. We have more and more court work that goes on these days, clinical consults, work with carers, and it goes on and on. So it's a really complex ecosystem. And somewhere in there, we need to be focused on upskilling our caseworkers and to understand if they have a child or with a disability on their caseload, what that means, what that looks like, and who else needs to come into this kind of complex ecosystem. My colleague Lisa and I, when we were putting this together, we just thought, you know, looking at our own stats, we've got about 320 kids in our care. Only 13% of them have a plan. And I guess listening to the conversation this morning about data and Lynn's comment that between 30 and 40% notionally of children in out-of-home care would have a disability or a diagnosis of some kind, you know, our stats reflect the problem, I think. So these 71 children that don't have a plan and that are sitting outside the scheme, but come with all of their gorgeous complexity, they're the kids that probably keep us up at night, and they're the, you know, I think they're the kids that we worry about in terms of access to services, diagnosis, all of those sorts of things. Way too many words on this slide. So PSP caseworkers in the NDIS, what gets in the way? So high level, I think we have to make all of the decisions. Our caseworkers make all of the decisions in relation to the child. So, you know, we can hold PR, but we're not carer and we're not family of origin. Do they have enough time to make a good decision? Do they have enough time to think about children, young people, goal setting? Do they have enough time to liaise with, even liaise with the sport, if a child has a sport coordinator? Is there enough time to sort of sit down really carefully and really talk in depth about what kids need? Sometimes NDIS, even 6 years in, you know, we still find, and I'm sure you all do too, NDIS planners not aware of the out-of-home care legal framework, not aware that our case managers are the child rep. And you know, this really gets in the way, I think, particularly when it flips with our caseworkers not understanding the language and not being able to push back appropriately. I think, you know, and again, this is the uniting perspective. We think that understanding of disability diagnosis, early intervention, developmental delay, all of those things can be patchy. And as much as we try to upskill and find space in the day of a life of a caseworker, you saw the ecosystem map before, it's tough. It's tough. A lack of mental health support for kids. So I'll talk about that actually in a second at the next slide. Understanding our own roles and responsibilities in terms of the NDIS can be tricky and get in the way. And I think we heard Aunty talk this morning about some of the, again, 6 years later, some of the NDIS market and structural problems in terms of being able to access services. 6 years in to the scheme, why are we still seeing this? And you know, I continue to be surprised when I review BSP about, you know, the amount of times I see that very quite young children are sitting on waiting lists for OT, sitting on waiting lists for speech. And you think every 6 months, you know, of that child sitting on that waiting list is such a problem. More words. What other factors, what else do we think is going on that kind of gets in the way? We know that disability only went into care plans this year. And we've heard some conversation this morning about the conflation between health and the disability sector. So that's a new thing this year and a positive thing. Young people leaving care with a psychosocial disability, so not being able to access the NDIS until 25, and Uniting run some aftercare services. And, you know, I think our point there is if you've got a young person that wants to gain access, you've got aftercare services finishing at 25, you've got access to the scheme at 25, you've got a really small window to get that young person ready for their access application. We know young people leave care without diagnosis, with diagnosis, but often without a plan in place. We have kids leaving care that, their first years post care are often chaotic. They can be unaware of their own leaving care plan. We know that from the OCG report, and we constantly see that as we operate aftercare services in New South Wales. So if there's support there, if it was identified, if there was some funding there, often it's the young person doesn't even is not even aware of that. And we work into behaviour support systems, so we felt this was relevant, particularly in a sort of busy landscape of work. So 2 regulatory systems, caseworkers working in 2 regulatory systems, different definitions, different conceptualizations of restricted practice, and really busy, overworked caseworkers running around, developing evidence often for 2 different types of plans. There's got to be some clues there, right, to what we can fix, perhaps. In no way, shape or form do I stand up here saying we've got anything right, but we've tried 2 things quite intentionally. We are lucky enough to be an NDIS provider. So what we've done is tried to build a bridge that was completely, I think Lynn alluded to that too, it was completely non-existent. Actually, our out-of-home care or PSP services operating very much in isolation to our disability services previously. So we've tried some really intentional knowledge share. We have practice communities that operate and really try and focus hard on some of the issues that I've alluded to in the previous slides. We're trying really hard for a holistic approach across both systems and really capacity building, using our disability staff to kind of peer mentor our caseworkers in out-of-home care and capacity build their understanding of the scheme, build their language, and also to do the same thing with carers. And we've seen some really good results where we've tried that, and we've seen some staggering results in terms of plans year on year, and what kids that sometimes we've trebled or quadrupled funding that children are getting when we've actually used that approach. We've also, we've been self-funding an extended care pilot and providing a youth development coach for all of our young people in care from 15. And we've really found it uses an advantage thinking framework. It mirrors the NDIS goal setting. It's more relaxed. It's a more informal coaching process. It sits outside of the case management framework. And we've also found tangible evidence that young people are leaving care with better plans, better agency and a sense of empowerment about what they're eligible for and what they can go out and get. So some results there, and hopefully with the additional funding announcements and the commitment from government for extending care, we can start to look at that slightly differently too in the future. I think that's it. All right, thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. My name's Keady. I'm here with my colleague, Lynda Kramer. We're from the Elver Program. And I guess what we're going to talk to you about today is a little bit different. So we're a clinical team situated in DCJ, a partnership between DCJ and New South Wales Health, who are commissioned, I guess, to work at a particular end of out-of-home care, that more complex end of kids living in out-of-home care, predominantly in residential care. And I guess we're here with some professional humility to talk a little bit about our learning so far. We've only been a service since 2018. But I think what we have to offer today, I guess, is some of the, we'll talk a little bit about a young person's journey, but some of what we're learning about the profile and the needs of the children and young people that we are working with, and really alerting us to the silent nature of disability, particularly in child protection and advocacy populations. So I just want to start though by acknowledging that we're meeting on Aboriginal land today, the land of the Gadigal people. Acknowledge Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and colleagues in the room, and also acknowledge the amazing Aboriginal children and young people that we work with every day. They continue to inspire us despite their adversity, and on our darkest days to do better. And hopefully that's what we can achieve for them. A lot of people ask the name, where did the name Elver come from? We're situated in Parramatta. Parramatta is means the place of the eels in the language of the Parramatta people, on the land on which we work every day. And Elver is a juvenile eel. I could bore you all day with fun facts about eels, but in short, eels mate in the local waters, and then they go a long, long, long way out to spawn. And as eels grow, they grow into the juvenile or Elver eels. Those Elver eels traverse great adversity to get back to where they were first created and where they belong. And we thought, in working with children with out-of-home care, there can be no better kind of metaphor or way to represent, I guess, our service mission, to try and figure out ways to help kids in care belong, because certainly the population group we work with every day are disconnected in possibly every human way there is to be disconnected. So we're, as I said, a partnership. We anchored that partnership with South West Sydney Local Health District. That partnership looks like South West Sydney recruiting all of our clinical roles. Those clinicians come on board and are contracted to DCJ and work in the DCJ frame with the DCJ population. We work and target kids in statutory out-of-home care, so they have final orders under the age of 18, although we're often a little fuzzy around at the point at which we transition kids. And in DCJ language, they have a category. So when we're talking about that sort of pyramid idea of kids in care, we're sort of up the top of the pyramid in terms of the complexity. We're a multidisciplinary team, so very fortunate. We're a 9 FTE team for a statewide service. Very fortunate to have psychiatry, OT, speech, clinical psychology, CNC, social work and Lynda as our clinical lead. And there are 5 core components with intake, assessment, intervention, consult liaison stream, which is really about honouring the need to work very systemically and join services together in conversations about kids. We do training, education, and of course, a big focus for us is service integration and linkages. One of the, I guess Ben referred earlier to the tune review. The tune review, of course, found what we all understood, which was that children in out-of-home care continuously have bad outcomes, despite lots of policy and procedural change. One of the things that Tune recommended was the creation of more trauma treatment services. And I guess that was the genesis of our service. So in thinking about developing a model of care, we've really developed around the needs of the children that we service and support. So we started with the idea that we were a trauma treatment service. We added psychiatry and mental health professionals to that. And then we saw that actually in the population group that were coming through our doors, and particularly with the expertise of someone like Dr. Kinmond, who has, you know, a specialty and expertise around neurodevelopmental psychiatry as well as forensic psychiatry, we were noticing that there was an extraordinary level of functional disability and a range of challenges. And then we added as a service our allied health colleagues who I'd never really worked with speech and OT, so in such an integrated way before. And once you see the world in that integrated way, it's very hard to unsee it. What they help us to really, really notice is the level of functional disability, intellectual disability, and the silent nature of particularly sensory processing challenges, and the communication, the level of communication disorder in the kids that we're seeing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we, that's just about saying they're the target groups for us. More and more we're finding ourselves working in that under 12 age group where we have very young kids locked out of traditional service models because of the way that our current out-of-home care system is structured. But predominantly we work with kids, whatever the acronym, ACA, IPA, ICM, whatever it is, we work with kids in individualised at trying to work towards ways that they can integrate and live safely with it. So we'll talk a little bit about Riley, and then through Riley's story, we'll highlight some of the, I guess, the data that we've started to collect and what that's telling us for the lessons we're certainly needing to learn about intervention.
It feels like our conversation or our talk is really to demonstrate what you've been talking about beforehand. It's all of what everyone has noticed, and then we're bringing the practical side of that. So you'll notice a lot of what has come before in the story that we tell. So Riley is an Anglo-Saxon young man who's living in rural New South Wales. And when he came to us, he'd been through many placements and had diagnoses of reactive attachment disorder, ADHD, ASD, mild ID, chromosomal abnormality. The problem for those people in the care system and the reason that they were coming to us was because they were concerned about his aggression and shoplifting knives, that he's firelighting, that there was these sexual themes for Riley, and really worrying, concerning thoughts that he was talking about that were alienating him from his carers because nobody knew what to do or what to say, and everybody was worried about risk. There were thoughts that maybe he had bipolar disorder, but there was no confirmed diagnosis of that. And the NDIS, there'd been an application and he'd been declined. So the issues for Riley were that he had a history of abuse and trauma, including his own child sexual assault, and the carer support and education. So that's what they were coming to us for. And often when people come to Elver, they don't actually know what they want. So they'll refer with lots of really big behaviours and lots of really concerning stories and worries about risk, but they don't actually know what can or what be done or what they want from us. So from an Elver perspective, Kate mentioned that we've kind of developed over the last 4 years, and for someone like for Riley, then the trauma lens was pretty obvious. The fact that he'd had multiple placements, he's now in a one-to-one, not able to be matched with anybody else. That he had a mild ID and reactive attachment disorder with the trauma. And his current context was he's 17, he's leaving care in 6 months. What's going to happen to this young boy after he leaves? So from an Elver perspective, when people come to us, it's easy to look at the trauma or the mental health or the disability. We're really interested in the long story, because what we know, I'm going to look this way because I can't see up there, is that young people in out-of-home care will have high incidences of adverse life events. They'll have high incidences of self-harm, attempted suicide, completed suicide. There's high levels of early disengagement from school, high levels of adolescent pregnancy and parenthood, high incidences of presentations to emergency departments, and high levels of repeat interactions with the justice system. But we also notice from the young people coming through to the ACAs is that there's also often high levels of maltreatment, including non-accidental head injury, that's been part of a story in an ambulance report from a long time ago that may have led to removal, but hasn't been part of the ongoing story of understanding what's happening to them. that the high exposure of FASD and marijuana use in pregnancy or substance use in pregnancy, and the high cognitive and intergenerational trauma. So for that long story, we can't just look at what comes in. We can't even look at just the reports that come in. We really need to be the investigators. We need to look about the people who do know. We need to go to the families. We need to go to the park service or maybe the service before that. Look, really developing and growing those partnerships with education, with educational out-of-home care specialists, with out-of-home care clinic, the clinics within health, as well as mental health, using our 16 A's across Justice Health to be able to pull together all of the information so that we can understand young people like Riley better. So in Elver, if we look, we've got around 400 kids. We've got a snapshot of some of our data. And then on referral, what we notice is that often the carers, the caseworkers who may have been there a week, 2 weeks, they've been to panel, they're being told to refer to Elver. It's kind of common these days in DCJ, but often they don't know that the young person has a disability, which we've heard before today. The trauma is also there. That these are the Elver diagnoses, and we know that young people in out-of-home care are more likely to have more diagnoses by the time they turn 5. In middle childhood, they're going to attract diagnoses from a mental health by paediatricians or in snapshots in emergency departments, and those diagnoses will continue on with them. So ADHD is really common in ASD, so they're some of the more common ones. When they come to Elver, we found that 80% of children will be enrolled in education. But then you've got 67% of those not attending at all, and another 27% only going for maybe 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day, 2 days a week. Yep. We look at our speech and our language results, then we're 9 FTE across a whole state, looking after the 7% top of that peak. We can't do all of the assessments. We really need to partner with those services in their local areas. And we try to have young people owned and known and owned within their local area, and that's including with their allied health. So half of our assessments will, in this subgroup, have been completed by other people. But what we found out of the people who had speech and language results, that 91% have a speech and language difficulty or challenge. From the sensory assessments that we've done, we love our OT, and OTs are so much more than handwriting and functional assessments, my goodness. But out of these 37, you can see that 34 had sensory processing differences. And of those 34, 23 were severe. And so looking at that regulation, if we go to the next slide, I think it is on, hang on, do it the next slide. And of the adaptive functioning assessments, whether done by us, then the severity of the adaptive functioning. So really at that lower end of functioning within the community, and yet they weren't on, not on NDIS without the diagnosis, with stories of bad behaviour rather than a disability. So in Elver, we are guided by the Bruce Perry's work around and others around the need to regulate before you can relate and talk, and before you can then think about your behaviour. So if you think about the kids who are coming in, we can do cognitive work till the cows come home, but if they're not regulated, if they don't feel safe, then they can't access those parts of their brain to be able to do the work and to reflect on their own goals, like making goals with young people who don't feel safe. They can't get to that point to be able to think about that. So if we come back to Riley, his speech assessment on his expressive and receptive language is kind of okay. It's within normal limits, which is why he'd already had one when he had his first NDIS application. He's got a mild ID, but he can talk, he can understand, he knows consequences. So what support does he need? And then he when you look at that frame of all those concerns, that then becomes more of a justice frame of thinking about where he's going after 18, if he can talk and understand. But when we did his pragmatic language skills, we found that he was actually, his social understanding and language was below a 3-year-old. Yeah. And then when we looked at his ABAS, his percentile rank was right up that very top. So his sensory first, he's right up there very top with his being more interested in sensory experiences, much more likely to be overwhelmed by the experiences that he's actually seeking, and that he'll detect sensory cues more, and also miscues more. So he's up that very end of the percentile rank compared to his peers. And then on the ABAS, again, if you just look at the percentile, then over 99 of his peers are all in the same room, are all going to be better than him. And in some case, 999 or 997 are going to be better functioning than what he is. So on discharge, where did we get with Riley once we've collected that long story? And with us, it's not just the long story, it is in all of the development that you were talking about. There's training, staff training and development. There's what you want to do is change the narrative. You've got to go from sad and bad to understanding developmental disability and then increasing empathy. Because if the child is understood, then the narrative changes, the conversation changes, the opportunities within placement change. So severe pragmatic disorder was added. We also were able to work really closely with an amazing caseworker who developed a really close relationship with his mum, who had a moderate to severe intellectual disability of herself, and taking away the shame and the risk of losing a child or losing contact, was able to talk about the alcohol use within pregnancy. So without the sentinel features, we were still able with the sensory assessment, the pragmatics with the ABAS, and then the confirmation of alcohol use in pregnancy, able to get FASD, and we had the mild ID. So he stopped, like his placement was placed near mum, and he stopped absconding. He stopped substance use. The police stopped turning up with sirens and bells and whistles. The carer and the casework started working with him about what do you want to do today, rather than being scared, what are you going to do today? And there's a better understanding of the drivers and responses to sexualized behavior, and then partnering with New Street, rather than asking one service to hold, whether that's CAMS, whether that's New Street, whether that's whoever it is, rather than asking one service to hold a young person who has such complexity, looking at how do we partner, how do we dip in and out of each other's lives and our professional lives to support young people when they need it most. And his NDIS package is at 116,000 on leaving care. He's got a 2-to-1 SIL post 18, and he's applied for a job in the community. So we're really proud of him, and more importantly, the people around him and his family are really proud of him, and he knows that. So that's a glimpse of Elver and what we do. And yeah.
It's encouraging, isn't it? I love the passion, isn't it? You know, the excitement of you being involved in things that are making a difference, right? And so that's where we're going to move to, right? We're going to look at the issue of, it's very scary, I've got to say, when I hear these things. It is quite scary. And, you know, the broad systems issues that Amy and Ben kicked off with, the challenge in terms of, are we really accessing Aboriginal leaders and Aboriginal workers? And that's a critical issue. The fundamental, this is not theoretical, this is a fundamental human rights issue that we're tackling. And then some really good follow-up in terms of, there are some great things that are happening. This is not impossible. We can do some fantastic things. But the challenge is, okay, in a system, out-of-home care system, which is, what is it, 1.4 billion annual funding these days, it can't be a hit and miss proposition. I go back to work I did, and I'll be quick on this, residential care. Kids in resi care, had a look at 2016 data in my former role. We found that about 50% of those kids were identified as having a disability or additional support needs based on education criteria. Those kids, the 2016 data, right, 43% were missing school, okay, under parental responsibility. What do we mean by that? They're missing over 80 days of schooling on average each. We have 1,200 kids who leave care every year. Okay, we're extending care to 21. That's a good thing. Maybe it'll enable us to get our act together a little bit more. But a significant number of those kids are leaving care with disability. How do we, move away from a hit and miss proposition as to whether we're actually providing them with the supports that they need, right? And going back to the, the early work, how do we avoid failing to pick things up early and respond early and provide support? And so that's what we're asking you to focus on. What are the elements of good practice? That's great. There'll be some really great ideas put on it. But what are the opportunities and barriers to practice change? Okay, there'll be a bit of negativity in there. But let's then get excited about how could we enhance our cross-sector collaboration? Not just in terms of agency to agency, but at a systems level to support children and young people with disability to thrive and fulfill their potential. We're on the back of Work Within the Uni and others in terms of a workforce development and training blueprint. Amy and I had a chat. Oh, that's lovely. We'll have the blueprint on the table. But the challenge is going to be, from a systems point of view, how to implement it. That's the same issue here. How do we make sure that we're not rolling the dice when it comes to the rights of these kids? That in 3 years' time, we say this system is much stronger. And so I look forward to what you've got to tell us in a few moments. All right, great. Thank you.
Just been so much to inform this conversation. So we're looking forward to moving into a conversation now with you at the tables that you're at. If you need to, feel free to take a comfort break, a stretch break as we move into this next phase. There are numbers on your table. So we're just going to bring up the questions that we'll start with. And then we're going to have a timekeeper and ask you to change tables so that you can address each of these questions. So here we go. Here we go. Yep. So just so you know, the first question, so tables 1 and 2 in the back corner, we'll start with those elements of good practice. 3 over here on this corner, and 4, we'll be looking at practice, opportunities and barriers for practice change. And then 5 and 6, you can see at the front and the middle, we'll be looking at opportunities for cross-sector collaboration. The numbers are on the table. So feel free to take a few minutes break and then come on back and we'll start the conversation. Thank you so much.
Can I just quickly, before people go, we'd really like to thank our incredible guest presenters. And we've just got a very small local token of our appreciation to you all. Thank you so much for setting the scene for us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our speakers. So just for those who are online as well, we're taking a 5-minute break and then we're going to be coming back to the room, but we aren't going to be live streaming this part. So we're going to end the live stream now. Thank you so much for being online with us. Thank you.